Get the play going. And I just want to share my screen with everybody just for a moment, because this is an important piece of paper that you should have on your syllabus, on your download. Again, we're repeating it, but this is very important for numbers for you guys to understand here. And this is the era of the judges. And of course, as you see here, it begins with Joshua, and that's where our classes began 4 classes ago. Othniel was the first judge. We have a lot of amazing judges here. Some of them were better than others. As we spoke in last class, Samson, he was the 12th and final judge. And as we explained where my mouse is now, we have the high priest Eli, and that's who we're going to be speaking about today. Eli, the high priest, who some refer to as the 13th judge. We're also going to discuss where he lived and where this was in Israel. And then, of course, the great prophet that we're going to be discussing tonight as well, Samuel. So we see here Eli reigned 39 years, and Samuel the prophet reigned 11 years. And the 3rd and 4th page of your syllabus will discuss some of the mathematics and some of the numbers of our history as to how we know, for example, we have the year 2500 from creation and moving all the way down to Samuel. You see here, Samuel, the last row, which he reigned for 11 years, it's the year 2860. My math basically will put this at around 100 years before the first temple is built by King Solomon. So Joshua, just, it's an important number to remember. Joshua begins 1200 BCE. We know the second temple was destroyed in 70 AD, which means there's a span of 1200 years, which is a long time, obviously, from when Joshua comes into the promised land until the second temple is destroyed. But it's important to remember to break down this 1200 years into 3 segments. The first 400 years is Joshua entering the promised land and all the judges. Those are roughly 400 years. If you count the years of Joshua and the prophets, and the judges, all the way through Samson, and then all the way through Samuel, we'll have around 380 years, give or take. So let's just say 400 years. And the first temple, which was built by King Solomon, also lasted around 400 years, 420 to be exact. And then you have the 70 years between the first temple and the second temple. And the second temple that was rebuilt in Jerusalem lasted another 400 years. So thus, this 1200 BCE, when Joshua came to the promised land, you have 400 years from Joshua basically till the temple is built. You have another 400 years of the first temple standing, and you have another 400 years of the second temple standing. So those are 1200 years. So that brings us to the destruction of the second temple of 70 AD. So it's just always good to remember these 2 numbers. 1200 BCE is when Joshua came into the promised land, and 70 AD was when the second temple was destroyed, when the Romans destroyed the second temple. And that's when, of course, the modern historians pick up with Joseph Flavius and so forth. This already, you can go to any library and you can look up that history. But we have, thank God, these books, and of course, the Dead Sea Scrolls, which we spoke about in the first class, which gives us some evidence and some historical context. Okay, so Samson was the 12th and final judge, and what made him unique was that he was, I'm just stopping my share, give me a minute, stop share so you can see me. Hold on. Where's my son Zali? How do I stop share? Give me a minute, folks. How do I stop the share, Shmuley?
What do you say? What do you want to eat?
Guys, I just want to zoom my thing here.
So zoom.
Hold on. Give me a minute, folks. Give me a minute.
On your mouse pad, just use your fingers to zoom in.
Stop share.
Stop share.
Okay, there we go. All right, sorry. Okay, you have to ask the question in the classroom because I can't. But I take the questions. Okay, so this Samson was unique in that he was the 12th and final judge, and he was the only judge that was actually killed by the enemies. All the other judges had somewhat of a peaceful ending, let's just say, and Samson was the only one that was killed by the enemies. The other thing
Wait,
to
wait,
note,
Mental,
yeah, go ahead, Miriam. Yeah.
you said Samson is, wait a minute, when I counted it, it's different unless you're not counting Deborah.
No, these don't count these rows.
I'm
Not every
counting from
person.
Joshua.
No, but
down.
no, but not all the names are judges. Miriam.
oh,
For
okay.
example, Avimelech, who's Gidon's son, was not a judge; he was a wicked person. But because there was no judge reigning at that time, so that's why they give us 3 years, so we don't lose the mathematics of our historical timeline. But not all these names on the left column, I'm glad you brought that up, Miriam, are leaders of the Jewish people.
Okay, thank you.
Sure.
Ta,
Yes, Ali.
how many years is between the first and the second base of Mikdash?
70 years.
Okay, got it.
Yeah, so I said roughly 1200. Okay, so my kids, thank God, are on the Zoom and they're grilling me, which is the way I like it. Okay. After Samson was killed, the book of Shmuel, Samuel, opens up. So the book of Samuel opens up with a very interesting story, and that is the story of the tabernacle, the Mishkan, which was in a city called Shiloh. And Shiloh is on your map. I'll open up the map on my screen a little bit later, but if you have the map in front of you, which we've had in the last many classes, it's smack in middle, right above the city of Gilgal. You know what? It's only fair. Let me share the screen. Let me just show it to you because Shiloh is a very big part of our class here. Okay, so that's the map. It's on the second page of your syllabus. And I'm zooming it in. And here's Shiloh right here. Okay, this is Shiloh on the map. I'm circling it, if you see it. And it's in the tribe of Ephraim. So that is Shiloh. And you see it's very close to the town of Gilgal. And if you remember, the Mishkan, the tabernacle, wasn't Gilgal, but ultimately, for a majority of those first 400 years, give or take, before the temple was built, the Mishkan, the tabernacle, was in Shiloh. We'll learn soon it was exactly 369 years that it was in Shiloh. So in any case, this is where the story of Samuel begins. And there's a woman by the name of Hannah. You know the famous story of Hannah. It's in the Talmud as well, but it's in Samuel, the book of Samuel as well. She was married to a guy by the name of Elkanah, E-L-K-A-N-A. They had no children. So Hannah, to her credit, tells her husband, Elkanah, to take a concubine and have children with her. This is, if you remember, what happened also with Abraham and Sarah. Sarah couldn't have children, so she tells Abraham, go and get another woman, and that woman, as we know, was Hagar. It's all in the Torah. The same thing happened over here at the beginning of the book of Samuel. And his wife, Penina, the concubine Penina, Elkanah's second wife, Penina, actually has roughly 10 children. And Hannah has no children. And the book seems to come out that Penina was somewhat hostile to Hannah. Kind of like what happened with Hagar and Sarah. Hagar was sort of jabbing Sarah. I guess God doesn't think that you're worthy, right? And this is sort of what happened with Penina. But the commentators, to their credit in the Talmud, they actually say, no. Penina wasn't really trying to be hostile to Hannah. Rather, she really was just encouraging Hannah to pray a little harder to have children. And indeed, that's what happens. Hannah makes the trek to Shiloh. She's actually from the tribe of Ephraim, and as we just learned before, Shiloh is in Ephraim. The city of Shiloh is in the tribe of Ephraim, so she doesn't make too long of a trek, but she goes to the tabernacle, to the great synagogue, to pray for a child. So she's in the tabernacle, and she's shuckling away, and she's moving her lips, davening, Shema Yisrael, whatever she's davening, and she's very flamboyant and very energetic in her prayer. And Eli, who is the high priest, who, as we said, some people also thought that he really was a judge, but let's just say for our sake of the class, he's the high priest serving for almost 40 years, like Moses in Shiloh, in the tabernacle. And he accuses Hannah of being a drunk. And he actually says, Hannah, what are you doing? Why are you drinking in the tabernacle? You don't drink shots in the temple. So she says, no, you're mistaken. You're mistaken. I'm not drunk. I'm just praying. Maybe in those days, they weren't accustomed to ladies praying in the tabernacle, or certainly they weren't accustomed to ladies davening and praying loudly and moving their lips, and she just didn't look the part. And the commentators actually say something beautiful. If you don't know Hebrew, you'll have to skip this next 30 seconds. If you know Hebrew, it's very interesting. Eli, the high priest, before he accused Hannah of being drunk, he went to the Urim V'Tumim. The Urim V'Tumim is a breastplate that is like an apron, but with beautiful 12 stones. Each stone has a certain amount of letters. And this is the way the high priest would somewhat get messages from this breastplate. So the prophets like Samuel, they don't even need the breastplate. They're just prophesizing. But the high priest, who's not quote unquote a prophet, he's getting this energy and these messages from the letters in the stones. And the stones and the lettering basically made a message to Eli, the high priest, and it said a 4-letter word, Shikora, Shin, Kaf, Reish, Hey, which means a shikar. She's a drunk. So Eli goes to Hannah and says, now I know for sure you're a drunk. The breastplate tells me from the stones from God that you're a drunk. So he accuses Hannah. And Hannah says, no. You're mixing up the lettering. It doesn't say Shikora, but it says Kisara. It's the same 4 letters, but it's Kisara, like Sarah. I am like Sarah. I cannot have children. I gave to my husband a concubine. They had children, but I want children of my own, and I'm praying. I am like Sarah. I'm not a shikara, a drunk. This is a beautiful word, a beautiful teaching from the, let me just say, who did I learn this from? From the Vilna Gaon. Okay. Anyways, other commentators say, if Eli is the high priest, why would you make such a mistake of accusing somebody a drunk? What kind of tzaddik is this? To see someone davening and you're accusing her of being a drunk? So here again, the Talmud jumps on this. You have a lot of Talmud on these kind of stories. And the Talmud also tells us God sort of wanted Eli to make this mistake so that once Hannah would correct her and prove to her that she's really not a drunk and she's really a devout woman and a tzaddik, Eli would be forced to pray extra hard to make sure that Hannah would have a child, to sort of make amends of this accusation. And indeed, that's what happens. Shmuel, the Samuel in the book of Samuel tells us that Eli went and prayed extra hard, and he prayed for a child for Hannah. And before Hannah departed from Eli, the high priest, she actually made a vow. And she said, if you give me a son, I will dedicate my son after 2 years to serve you and the temple. So Hannah leaves Shiloh. She goes back home with her husband Elkanah. And lo and behold, 9 months later, Mazel Tov, and she has a child. So she has a child. She comes up for the high holidays with her family, but the baby is just a young baby. But after 2 years, she indeed brings her son Shemuel. Hannah brings her son Shmuel. This is the character who we're talking about, Samuel. And now he's a 2-year-old baby serving. I mean, it's not much serving. He's only 2 years old, but he's, I don't want to say adopted because he still belongs to Hannah, but he's taken under the wing of the great high priest, Eli. So that's what happened there. And of course, Hannah keeps on coming to visit with her son, with her husband, Elkanah. But now Shmuel already is becoming world famous because already now there's a lot of interesting stories of how he's very smart and how he's very clever. And of course, he's being groomed by none other than the high priest, the leader of the Jewish people. Any questions so far? Everybody good? Okay. Shmuel also means that God heard from the word Shema, Shemu, or Shema, and then Kel, which is God. So that's why Hannah calls her son Shmuel. Okay, continuing along. After a few years, people put this now that Shmuel is now at the age of 39 years old. I will prove it later, even though it doesn't say it. But now Shmuel is 39 years old, and he hears a voice. And the voice says, Shmuel, Samuel, Samuel. And Samuel runs to the next room to his teacher, his master, Eli, the high priest, and says, what's going on? And Eli says, I didn't call you. Go back to sleep. So Samuel goes back to sleep. Again, he hears a voice, Samuel, Samuel. So again, he goes out of his bed and he runs to the next room. He goes to Eli. Eli says, I didn't call you. And after the third time this happens, where he hears a voice, Samuel, Samuel, Samuel runs to Eli. Eli realizes, Obviously, this is God speaking to him. This is God speaking to him and not to me. And Eli instructs his student, Samuel, and tells him, go back to sleep. And when you hear a voice, Samuel, Samuel, you will say, I am here. I am listening. What do you want? And indeed, Samuel goes back to sleep. He hears the voice, Samuel, Samuel. And to Samuel's humility, he doesn't say, God, I hear you speak, because even Samuel doesn't think he's worthy enough. So all Samuel says is, Hineni, I'm here. Speak. He doesn't say, God, speak, like Eli instructed. And indeed, God then tells Samuel some very bad news. And the bad news is that Eli had two sons. Their names were Hophni and Pinchas. They were already in their 50s, somewhat a little bit older than Samuel. And God felt that these two children should not take over the mantleship of leadership like their father Eli, and it's going to be given to Samuel. Furthermore, these two children are going to be killed in the next battle between the Jewish people and the Philistines. This is what God is telling Samuel. And third of all, he says that the Jewish people are going to lose the ark. The ark, which is in the tabernacle in Shiloh, is going to be sacked. Samuel is very disturbed. And of course, the next day when he's out to work in the tabernacle with the sacrifices, Eli is trying to get out of Samuel, no, what happened last night? What did God tell you? And of course, Samuel doesn't want to say anything because it's all bad news in regards to his teacher, Eli. So that's how it leaves. Then, of course, the next chapter in Samuel discusses the war, the battle that happens between the Philistines and the Jewish people. And indeed, the Jewish people are losing the war. So without no choice, the Jewish people decided without Eli's consent, who at this point is 98 years old, the high priest is 98 years old. It actually tells us how old he was in the book of Samuel, how old Eli was. And they take the ark from the tabernacle. The Jewish people take the ark. Who takes it? Who has the guts to take the ark? It was Eli's children, Hophni and Pinchas. And they take this ark from the tabernacle of Shiloh and they take it out to war because they figured such a holy ark, nothing can happen to the Jewish people. This is the same ark, if you remember, that split the Jordan River. This is the same ark that led the Jewish people in the desert for 40 years. And they were victorious over the nations of the Amalekites and so on and so forth. So without any choice, Hophni and Pinchas and the Jewish people take the ark and they go to fight the Philistines. And what happens? Not only the Jewish people killed, but the ark is captured. Who's the general? Who's the leader of the Philistines at this point? It's Goliath. And Samuel, the book of Samuel tells us that there was one individual from the tribe of Benjamin. It actually says there was one individual from the tribe of Benjamin that went into the enemy camp, into Goliath's camp, and did a raid and stole the tablets out of the ark that Goliath captured. So he takes the tablets. Who's the he? Who's this individual from the tribe of Benjamin? This individual was Saul, Shaul, who is later going to become the king. And he puts sackcloths on his head and he runs back to Shiloh to the great high priest Eli to give him the bad news. It says that Eli, besides being old, he was also blind. So he didn't really see the ark being taken in the first place by his kids. Nor did he see Saul, this great tall individual from the tribe of Benjamin, coming back with the tablets. He didn't see the sackcloths. So this is all explaining why Eli is not puzzled when he sees Saul, because he's a little bit out of the loop here. And Saul tells him some bad news. He tells Eli, the high priest, your two children, Hophni and Pinchas, were killed in battle. The Jewish people lost, and the ark from the tabernacle was captured. And at this point, Eli falls back off his chair, he breaks his neck and dies on the spot. This happened at the age of 98 years old. And now we begin the reign of Samuel. So now he's 98 years old. If you saw on your chart, this finishes the reign of 39 years of leadership from Eli the high priest. And now we move on to our next character, Samuel, who's now unanimously, not even voted, but everyone knows right away he's the leader because he was being under the tutelage and guidance of Eli the high priest. And besides that, he's very pious. And Chafni and Pinchas, Eli's children, are out of the picture. So now we have Samuel.
But why Samuel?
Because Samuel was being raised and bred by Eli the high priest in the tabernacle for all the years, because Hannah gifted her son Samuel to Eli the high priest. And he was working in the tabernacle side by side with Eli. So once Eli died, Samuel became the unanimous leader of the Jewish people. Thank you, Zali, for that. Okay. Now we're in chapter 4 of the book of Samuel, who again is the individual who wrote the book of Samuel. So Samuel, just so you remember, he wrote the book of Joshua. No, excuse me. Joshua wrote the book of Joshua. Samuel wrote the book of the Judges, all the history we have on the Judges. Samuel wrote the book of Ruth, which we spoke about last time, because Ruth, if you remember, is during the era of the Judges. And Samuel wrote the book of Samuel until his death, which will be pretty much at the end of Samuel 1. Next class, we'll probably be jumping into Samuel 2. Gad. Someone over here is asking me who wrote Samuel 2. It was the prophet Gad. His name was Gad, who was a prophet that lived during the era of King David. And he was the one that put together and crafted the diaries and the storyline of the book of Samuel 2. In the old days, just, it was not called Samuel 1, Samuel 2. It was just called the book of Samuel. Later in life, I don't know if it was 1,000 years ago or maybe 1,500 years ago, just to make it easier for the people, they broke the book into Samuel 1 and Samuel 2, but it's really one volume, Samuel. Okay, now we have some very interesting episodes that take place, which is the Philistines who captured the ark. Now, they don't have the tablets. The tablets were brought back, but the ark they have. So this ark went to 5 different towns, and I'm going to share the screen now. And the book of Samuel in chapter 4 actually tells us where the wandering ark was going. So this is a backdrop of the land of Israel. Remember, this is where Shiloh is. I'm going to zoom in just a little bit. Okay. Let me get this out of the way a little bit. This is the town of Shiloh. Remember, that's the Jordan River. This is where the Jewish people entered. They started in Gilgal. That's where the tabernacle of Shiloh. And now the Philistines are down here. So they're the ones that captured. This is next to Gaza. In the book of Samuel, in the Hebrew, we don't call it Gaza. We call it Aza. So if you see Gaza, Aza, it's the same city. It's the same metropolitan area, but it's Gaza, Aza, it's the same. So the Philistines, they captured the ark, and it gives us a little bit of a route of where it went. So it started off in Gaza, then it moved to Ashkelon. There's Ashkelon. Then it went to Ashdod. These cities, I'm telling you, Ashdod, this is all in the book of Samuel. And then it moves to the town called Gath, right? Ashkelon and Ashdod still exist today. Gath, I don't know if Gath is still a town today on the modern map, but either way, that's Gath. And the last place it goes to is Ekron. This is a town called Ekron. If someone's on unmute, if you can just mute yourself, unless you have a question.
I have a question. Was there like a purpose to their going? But it sounds like they were tourists. They were tourists, and they were showing off what they.
Good question.
Their booty.
Miriam, very good question. The reason why the ark was moving around into these 5 places that I just mentioned is because every place it went to, the book of Samuel goes into detail about different pandemics and plagues that happened to those non-Jewish people that were housing and hosting the ark. And each place has a different type of mice or types of COVID, whatever the case was. There are different types of pandemics that were happening literally. And it actually details us the illnesses and the plagues that were occurring in those towns. So this all happened, by the way, within a matter of weeks. It wasn't like after 2 years, these are not dummies, these non-Jews who captured the ark, all under the, let's say, the area of the Philistine people. So
Wait,
they're
but
like,
they knew the tablets were gone.
yeah,
you
but
said-
the ark still has a power to it, and you see it had a power to it because it was plaguing all the people in those villages that were hosting and housing the ark. And you'll see, by the way, the ark causes havoc also to the Jewish people when they're not respecting it. So anyways, that's how the book in chapter 4 of Samuel tells us. It's wandering from place to place. And I don't mean wandering, it's not wandering like blindly. It's being housed, kind of like the Schneerson Library. It's not wandering. It's being housed in different areas. And the Rebbe doesn't want it to roaming in different countries that it doesn't belong to. So this ark was the same thing. It was, God certainly felt it didn't belong in those countries or those cities. It belonged in Shiloh. And as a result, it was causing a lot of pain and pandemic and loss to those families or tribes or even nations that were housing it. And again, this didn't happen over months. This happened over some places it was a half a day, and then boom, a plague. But Samuel just illustrates this and articulates this to show how dangerous it is to hold something that doesn't belong to you, certainly something like the ark. So what happens is, after it's in the 5th place, which I mentioned, which is Ekron, finally the people of Ekron realize, enough is enough. It's killing all of our people, all of our brothers and sisters. We're going to put the ark on a wagon. We're going to put animals to carry it. It doesn't say horses. I think it was bulls. And it's going to take the wagon, and wherever God wants this ark to land, so be it. And the people of Ekron followed the wagon. They followed it blindly. And these animals took the wagon to a Jewish town called Beit Shemesh. All there in the book of Samuel. The problem was the people of Beit Shemesh, this is a Jewish people, didn't respect it properly. So what happened was, by the guidance of Samuel, it was brought to a town, give me a minute, in Kiryat Yearim. And Samuel again mentions this in chapter 7 of Samuel, that the ark was brought finally to its final destination, not final, but it was brought to a destination for 20 years. It was in a Jewish town called Kiryat Yearim, and that's where it stayed for 20 years until King David brought it to Jerusalem. Because King David was the king in Hebron for 7 years. I'm jumping a little bit because we haven't even spoken about King Saul yet, but I'm just telling you that for 7 years, King David was the king after King Saul for 7 years. And then he moved to Jerusalem for 33 years, which is King David was the king of Israel. Well, not exactly. He was the king of Hebron for 7 years, and then he was the king of Jerusalem for 33 years. So when he left from Hebron to Jerusalem, he took a detour and went to the home of Avinadav, who was living in Kiryat Yearim, where this ark was stationed for 20 years. And then it was brought by King David a little bit later. Now, at this time, while the ark was in Kiryat Yearim, it's important to remember, where was the tabernacle? The tabernacle was destroyed in Shiloh by the Philistines, right? Remember, just maybe a few days after Eli was killed. So the tabernacle was rebuilt in a city called Nov. It was there for around 14 years, give or take, and then it moved to a town called Givon, all in Israel proper. So you had the tabernacle. This is the first time you had for 57 years. The ark was not being housed in the tabernacle. And the reason that is because the ark was so precious, and the Jewish people felt that the Jewish people themselves couldn't really take care of it, just like what happened at Beit Shemesh. So they left it in Kiryat Yearim for 20 years. They also didn't want it to be captured. While the Mishkan, this tabernacle, was somewhat hollow. It had the ark, it had the altar. Sacrifices were happening in this tabernacle for 57 years, from when the ark and from when the tabernacle was destroyed in Shiloh until finally King Solomon came to the picture and built the temple. For 57 years, the tabernacle was this very temporary edifice. Again, the tabernacle moved to Shiloh, and we know it was there for 369 years. The tabernacle was destroyed by the Philistines. The ark was captured, and Eli the high priest was killed. So there's now little different maps. There's different roads happening. After the tabernacle was destroyed in Shiloh, the tabernacle was moved to 2 other cities for 57 years until finally King Solomon builds the first temple. So that's the tabernacle. So it's a tabernacle with an altar, but it doesn't have the ark. And this is happening for 57 years. Separately, there's the ark, and the ark is hanging out in Kiryat Ye'arim for 20 years. Why is it there? Why isn't it in the tabernacle? Because people didn't know how to respect the ark, or the Jewish people were nervous that it was going to be captured again, like it was captured many years earlier. So I don't want you to get confused. We're speaking about history over here. It's important to remember that at some point, the ark was not in the tabernacle. It was in the tabernacle in Shiloh. The ark was in the holy temple that King Solomon built. But the ark was not in this temporary era of 57 years in the tabernacle, which was located in a city called Noven Givon, which was a 57-year period between the destruction of the tabernacle in Shiloh and the rebuilding of the temple, and not the rebuilding, and the building of the temple in Jerusalem. Okay, Larry and Shira, do I make sense? I see you nodding your head. I just want to make sure I'm not confusing you guys too much with the mathematics. But this is important for the sake of history here. Okay. Any questions before I move on? Lev, anything going over here? No, no problem.
No, Rabbi, I was just going to say that I know with the Romans they would bring their the gold bird that they would bring into battle, and if it was captured, which was rare because they tend to win, people they would share it in order to show that they had won. So maybe the tabernacle being moved is the way that to show that the Jews had lost. And it was a celebration of their loss by sharing it amongst different locations.
Very good. Very good. That resonates with me. Thank you very much. Good. Very good, Lev. Okay, let's just go a little bit more, and then we'll move on to our 3rd and 4th page of the Talmud that we have in our syllabus. So that discussion is about the tabernacle. We covered the ark. It's important to remember that in the tabernacle, which was located in this town called Noven Givon, besides the altar, sacrifices were happening there. And of course, the menorah was in there. And of course, the jar of the manna and Aaron's stick, the staff. So it wasn't completely bare. There was still a lot of action in that tabernacle. But the main focal point, the ark itself, which now had the tablets that Saul captured from Goliath, is now in that ark sitting in Kiryat Ye'arim. I think there's a current town called Kiryat Ye'arim in Jerusalem somewhere. I don't know if it's the same Kiryat Ye'arim. Someone can Google it, but that Kiryat Ye'arim is actually mentioned and written in the book of Samuel there in chapter 7.
Wait,
Okay.
Mendel, could you say again what was in the tabernacle? That mun, and there were 2 other things.
The jar of the mun, Aaron's stick, Aaron's staff, and the menorah, and the mizbeach, and the altar. Okay. Now, so Samuel is the reigning leader over here. He's in charge, no doubt about it. But as we can see, the Jewish people are not exactly in their strongest point. Eli the high priest was killed. He was like the tzaddik of the time, 98 years old. And the tabernacle is destroyed from Shiloh after 369 years. That's a long time of the Jewish people going to one place. Like think Washington, D.C., that's only 280 years old? So I think 370 years, that's a long time. And all of a sudden, the Jewish people are fragmented. And you have 12 tribes. I mean, sometimes they get along, sometimes they don't get along. Today, in the 20th, 21st era, you have different denominations of Jewish people. They're getting along, they're not getting along. It's not the greatest time for the Jewish people. Let's just say that. It wasn't like the days of Joshua, let's say. So what happens? The Jewish people, they make the ultimate mistake, and they plead to Samuel, the prophet, and they say, Samuel, Samuel, I think now it's time, especially now that Eli is dead and his children Hophni and Pinchas are dead. I think it's time that we should try to get a king, and the Jewish people should shift from having the leadership through judges and through prophets, but we should finally have a monarchy like the other nations. There's dozens of other non-Jewish nations. They seem to be quite successful. They seem to be doing well, and they have a monarchy. Samuel, please beseech God. We want a monarchy. We want to be like them, like the Goyim, like the non-Jews. Now, what's so bad? There's many commandments in the Torah that tell us about kings. There's a lot of laws that kings could do, that kings can't do. How do you treat a king? How are you not supposed to treat a king? So what's so bad that we say this is the ultimate mistake, that the Jewish people asked Samuel, we want a king like the other nations? Because if they would have said, we want a king because that's what God wants from us, and we want to fulfill the commandment of kings, so give us a king. But once the Jewish people said, we want a king because we want to be like the non-Jews, this was the ultimate slap in the face to everything Judaism believed for. After hundreds of years and all the miracles God did to show how the Jewish people are unique, and they don't have a million gods, they have one God, the God of the Hebrews. And now to Samuel, the prophet, who is clearly a prophet, and is telling Samuel, we want to be like the non-Jews, give us a king so we can be like them. So Samuel basically tells God, listen, I don't know what the Jewish people want from me, but basically, clearly I'm not enough. They want a king. So Samuel, in the way he addresses God in the book of Samuel, you see he's not happy with this. And God tells Samuel, I will give the Jewish people a king. I will listen to them. But this is a grave mistake. This is a mistake. So Samuel then goes back to the Jewish people and said, okay, God said we can have a king. God said we can have a king. You won. And he pulls all the people in and he gives them all these speeches. He gives them talks and talks about telling them what it means to have a king, a Jewish king, not like the non-Jewish kings. And all the Jews, they were just like drunk on finally Samuel, the prophet, is telling them they're going to have a king. They basically didn't listen to anything and any of the warnings and any of the guidelines and restrictions that a Jewish king should come with. And now they're waiting for Samuel to figure this out for the next move of who should be the next king. And not the next king, who should be the first king of the Jewish people. So this is a very big shift and turning point in the way we have the structure of Judaism, where it used to be 12 tribes and 12 priests of every tribe. And then you had either a judge or a prophet that led the Jewish people. So really, Samuel could have acted like a king, really. I mean, he speaks to God and he tells the Jewish people what should happen. But no, the Jewish people rejected that. They wanted a different system. They wanted a monarchy. So they wanted a new form of government, something completely new. So they're going to get it, but it was going to come with a lot of downfalls and hiccups. Of course, there are times when we have good Jewish kings and the monarchy was good, but most of the time, kings is a very dangerous business. It was very dangerous and very corrupt, these Jewish kings, of course, during the Second Temple. And even during the First Temple, there was some ay moments. They said after George Washington, after the Declaration of Independence on July 4th, maybe Lev can tell me if I'm wrong, my American historian over here, but the people went to George Washington and asked him to become the first king of the United States. They wanted a monarch because England was so powerful and it was so great. And America finally was able to win the war. And now they can have their own independent country in the United States. So now they also want to be a strong country and they wanted a king. And George Washington said, I didn't fight and do everything that I went through just so that I can emulate and copy what we were fighting against. So he rejected this idea of monarchy. And of course, they set up the 3 branches of government and so forth. So the Jewish people, even though they had a Sanhedrin, now they wanted a king. Okay. I'm not going to be able to go through in this class how it came about that Samuel gets Saul to be the first king. It's a beautiful story, and we will definitely share it in our next class because time is short. It's already 8:15. But I do want to spend 5 minutes, give or take, on the 3rd and 4th page of the syllabus. I'm sharing my screen. If you have it on a printout on your screen, great. If not, you'll share with me over here. This is the Talmud, just so you know what I'm copying here. This is in chapter 1 of Tractate Tanit, the 5th page, 5b. And it says over here, Rav Nachman poses another question, which Rabbi Yitzchak answered with a teaching from Rabbi Yochanan. And Rav Nachman said to Rabbi Isaac, these are great rabbis that lived during the times of the temple. What is the meaning of that which is written? And it came to pass when Samuel was old. Did Samuel ever become old? But he was only 52 years old. How do we know that? As the masters taught in the Baraita, if one died at the age of 52 years, that is the death of Samuel the Ramite, Shmuel Haramati. So even though in the book of Samuel, it says that Samuel died at an old age, and he was buried in his hometown of Ramahite, or in Hebrew, Ramati, the Talmud makes it very clear to us that he died at the age of 52. This age 52 is actually pretty important for us. Because if you remember, I told you at the beginning of the class that Samuel was 39 years old when God appeared to him in that prophecy, when he thought it was Eli, the high priest, but it really was God speaking to him. And basically God kind of anointed him, because right after that, Eli, the high priest, dies and Samuel becomes the next leader. So you're able to know that he was 39 years old at that point, because we know here from the Talmud that he died at 52. Furthermore, on the chronology chart that you have on the last row where it says Samuel and he reigned for 11 years, we only know he reigned for 11 years because of the following mathematics. If you don't like mathematics, you will not want to listen to this, but if you do, you can pay attention for the next 60 seconds and it'll come to light how this chart and these historians come to the conclusion that he was reigning Samuel for 11 years. And here it goes. We know that in the book of Samuel, as we said earlier, that the ark was in Kiryat Ye'arim for 20 years. That I already said, because that's also in the book of Samuel. So if you make a calculation like this, and I'm writing down so I have it nice and clear. We know he died at 52, Samuel. Samuel died at 52. He died basically right before Saul died, the king, before the torch was passed on to King David. So if I take 52 years when Samuel died, and I minus 3 years, because that's how long King Saul reigned, then I'm down to, he's now 49 years old. And because we know that the ark went to Kiryat Ye'arim 13 years prior when Eli the high priest died, so he was 39 years old, Samuel, when Eli the high priest died and the ark was transferred to Kiryat Ye'arim. So that's how we have that 11-year reign. And that's what the Talmud over here tells us by saying he died at 52. Let's go to the 4th and final page. Okay. Here it tells us the rabbis taught in the Baraisa, the days of the tent of the meeting. The tent of the meeting is the Mishkan. It was in the wilderness, 40 years less 1, i.e. it was 39 years. And the days of the tent of the meeting, the tabernacle, was in Gilgal, 14 years. It was 7 years during which the Jews conquered the land, and 7 years during which they apportioned it. So as we learned 2 classes ago, it was in Gilgal for 14 years. It stayed in Gilgal for 14 years, 7 years when Joshua was conquering the land, and then another 7 years when he was dividing up the land for the tribes. We also know that the days of the tent of the meeting, the days of the tabernacle, were in Nov and Givon for 57 years. So there you have remaining, the tabernacle was in Shiloh for 370 years less 369 years. So this is just some of the mathematics that our rabbis, that our historians are helping us. Again, these pages I'm sharing with you are dating back thousands of years. And that's how you have, for example, in your first page, this chart is not just a random chart, but it's based on a lot of work and mathematics and conclusions, which is just a little bit of an example I gave you. So that ends the era of Eli the high priest. And we have just now 3 years remaining in Samuel's life, and he's dealing basically really 2 years. We're dealing with Samuel now going to anoint Saul, how he found Saul, how Saul accepted the kingship. And believe it or not, he only reigned as a king for 2.5 years until he was taken over by his son-in-law, King David. So that ends it, because it's already 8:20. And anybody have any questions, now would be your time. I don't mean to